think we're going to have some really great insights from kind of all different size of organizations and and kind of areas of tech. So I know you covered Erica covered the introductions of our panelists, but I want to dig a little bit deeper with everybody. And if you can tell us a little bit about your current role and maybe a brief insight into experience you've had in growing a global team. Brenton?
Sure, thanks, Erica. CFO, COO for Elastic Path, but I guess what's relevant for this conversation, I'm actually located here in the UK in London, and Elastic Path has actually been in London for probably the better part of 10 years now, but we've sort of done it as a bit of a side of the desk type of operation, and so I'm here locally to really put some effort in, and so we're putting investment into the market, and well, everything is zigging at the macroeconomic spot we're trying to zag, and so here and live and doing a lot about what we'll be talking about today.
Hey, Keith.
Hey everyone. First of all, BC Tech, thanks for again giving me a chance to join in and support the tech community. I'm a partner now for a group called Fresh Founders. We're a group of hooligans and miscreants who invest our own money in startups, and then we do everything we can to help them first survive and then thrive. And really, we're just there to sort of help startups with like getting money, getting talent, getting customers. Those are the three things that really a startup needs. And Fresh Founders is a group that focuses on that today. And my background, obviously, worked for Galvanize for a decade, and we were in about 150 countries. So today's focus is about building your international presence. And so we were in a lot of spaces, and excited to share some of those experiences with you today.
So as Erica with a K mentioned, I'm from Communitech, so Director of Outposts. The Outpost program is an employer of record service, and I've been at the company for just over 10 years. And us, much like BC Tech, is designed to really help founders like yourselves start, grow, and scale your companies. So excited to be a part of the panel today.
Excellent, thank you. There's many reasons organizations may want to grow internationally. And I think Keith, you mentioned a few areas you're helping organizations with, like talent, growth, and or customers and money. In your experience, like what have you seen? Why would organizations want to go global? Like we've got great markets in our backyard. What draws companies to overseas?
Yeah, when I think of international, I think of outside of North America. And so that'll be like going into Latin America or going into Europe or APJ as an example. And so when I speak for the rest of this discussion, if I talk about international markets, I'm not talking about North America or going to the US. And so for strategic reasons, I think there's really three core reasons why you would go international. One is it's opportunistic. You see opportunities for first mover advantage in that market. And so it's a chance for you to kind of take what makes you unique and special and take it into a new market. Another one would be like access to perhaps lower cost talent, where you could get access to, say, engineering talent in Eastern Europe, where they're very strong, but at a price that maybe is more reasonable. And I think in a startup context, as an example, you're looking for is to stretch your dollar as far as you possibly can. And then the third reason would be that you have something that works well perhaps in a market that is not in North America. That's whether there's a compliance or governance factor that really makes you more unique or special in another market. You'd reach out for that reason.
Oh, that's great. And Karen, I know when we did the prep work, when you're helping organizations go to different regions, you're actually looking at the full North America, or like Mexico, US, and obviously operations in Canada. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that angle? Like why would organizations want to set up shop in the US? But I think almost more interesting Mexico, because I think that's a newer area that we're seeing some developments, or you're seeing some developments.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, Keith certainly covered off the top three. And I think the two that we focus on in terms of the work we do with founders is very much around helping them scale and grow their talent pool. So whether that's, retention of talent because they've got a really top performing employee that wants to relocate to Denmark or Mexico for a year or two, or just increase find and secure, I would say, countries like Mexico, where they still are producing top developers and software engineers, but the salaries are significantly reduced compared to what we're used to paying in Canada. So those are a couple of the primary reasons we work with companies. And I would say the third is really focused around them trying to scale and grow their business development operations. Oftentimes companies will want to have boots on the ground in the country they're scaling into because they understand the culture and can speak the language. So they want to hire in-country talent to be able to run BD for them.
Right. And then Brenton, you've now relocated to the UK. What was some of the triggers for really focusing on that jurisdiction?
Well, I think for us, it was really around putting the proper time and investment into being in the UK and having someone senior on the ground. One of the recommendations for any sort of going into new market is to anchor around your people. And we sort of had a lack of that. And so I ultimately volunteered to do that. But part of that is just being able to make your decisions locally, be able to move quicker from a time zone perspective. And ultimately just, it's that day-to-day relationship based, both we talked a lot about people in terms of the staff, but also people in terms of your partnerships and customers, whether they're existing or prospects as well.
Okay. And I just want to understand a little bit more. So it sounds like there was this real focus to actually move you there. What was your strategy before? Did you already have staff there and a team built there, or were you kind of trying to service it from your offices here?
We have had a team on the ground, but not really anybody senior leading it. So very much the, all reporting back into departments in Vancouver originally, and we're obviously in the States now as well. So going in, we also did an acquisition a few years ago where we did pick up a development hub in the UK, actually in Newcastle. And so really bringing a lot of pieces between global services, a new development team. We had an established sort of sales and marketing team, but again, not really bringing all the pieces together. And so that was sort of the main strategy for me coming over, was just to bring that together and put someone a little bit more senior on the ground. And we're still keeping the departmental, it's a matrix organization, so we do keep the departmental reporting, but really having a voice with, and when we say sort of EMEA, we're actually focused very much on the UK specifically. So that tight focus has been an important part of it as well.
Thank you. And Karen, when you're helping organization expands through Outpost, are you seeing more of that sales talent, or are you seeing more on the developer side? Do we have any trends here that we are seeing in the more recent years for what companies are focusing on, or is it more based on where they are in their own growth path that drives it?
So I would say 75% of the hires we're doing through our service are sales right now, and 25% are probably more on the technical side. And what drove the increase, I would say, in sales hiring was COVID. So a lot of the Canadian companies would just simply use their Canadian sales reps and assign them specific regions. So there was quite a bit of travel for Canadian salespeople. But when COVID hit, everything had to, travel wasn't possible. So now how do you continue to scale and grow into a market where you can't physically get to meet clients and interact with them? So we started seeing a huge increase in companies saying, you know what, it actually saves us money if we just hire in country and have a local person with boots on the ground, managing sales, interacting with clients, doing site visits. And again, that culture and language barrier is essentially eliminated when you've got someone local to manage, the sales and expansion specific to that region. The other 25%, like I said, is mostly, I would say, software engineers and developers. And again, it's companies looking to hire cheaper talent outside of Canada, and talent that's willing to work. As everyone knows, talent in Canada is very hard to come by these days, especially tech talent. So it's just really about opening up new markets.
Excellent. And just I'll double click there on the tech talent side, because I'm sure that that's going to be interesting to our audience. And I'll do an open question to whoever feels like they've got good insights on that. Are there specific countries where we're finding kind of good talent at affordable price with a good cultural fit? Are they ones that kind of would rank higher for you than others?
I think it kind of depends. I mean, there's engineering, like really strong engineering capabilities in Eastern Europe. There's strong technical schools in India. You can go to Latin America if you want time zone similarity. And so I think it really depends on your business and ultimately what you're trying to do. For us, what we did is we had teams in Eastern Europe, we had teams in India. At one point, I did a tour of Latin America looking for businesses in Latin America that could be good partners for talent. I didn't find what I was looking for, and mostly that was not because of the talent, but it was because of the sort of the compliance of regulatory and surprise costs, hidden costs kind of side of it. But I think it really comes down to like, what are you looking for? If you're looking for really deep engineering capabilities, Eastern Europe is a good place to look. It's a good balance for cost as well. We found a lot of success there. If you have things where you're just trying to offset, say some like reporting work or something specific where it's very repeatable, then looking to places like Vietnam or India or places like that could be super successful. You just have to kind of enter into it with the right mindset. And that's not to say that those places can't also be very successful for more complex work. I don't want to, make that statement. Just I think you're going to find more success in certain places for certain types of work that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've certainly found Eastern Europe's been an area that we've been able to find talent. But the other area too is the secondary market. So here in the UK, Newcastle, which is a secondary market, but a university town, we've actually found a lot of great talent, and actually partly because of the acquisition, but we've created more of a hub there, and that team is sort of bringing in talent out of their own network pool.
I just want to build on that, actually, what Brenton just said about a university town. That's a key takeaway. Like if you just take away from this session today, find the places where the universities have a lot of inflow of talent. That's a great location to look for talent overseas. If you're in a place where there really isn't a significant university in place, you'll struggle. And I think like places like Galway, Ireland, as an example, is a great location for financial talent. So look for that as a key indicator for useful places.
And Karen, are there any of these factors that you consider as well?
Yeah, for sure. I'd echo Eastern Europe for sure. We've had a lot of companies with success for technical talent there, as well as Mexico and Brazil. I would say more on the junior talent side than senior, but a lot of success, like I said, on junior software developers or engineers, specifically in Mexico and Brazil.
A big part too, Erica, is look at your existing team that you have in your own company. If you have a cultural understanding, speak the language, or have a background in your Canadian staff that are really well connected to another country, maybe they're immigrant to start with, that's another really important thing. So that if you already understand the culture, you already speak the language, that can make a big difference in being able to like get across the context of what your business does.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably creates great growth opportunities for your local team that they can really like take ownership of this offshore team and make them successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got these two areas that would drive growth for international expansion for organizations. It's like that customer base that's maybe not here in a different region where your product really has great fit, and then you've got this talent play on the other side. So as organizations look at these two areas, they look at their own backyard as well. Like what kind of needs to be true for them to kind of take on either of these strategies? Like really, what are those key things that they need to think through? Brenton, maybe you can double down on your move a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting to the sort of the why do you do it and then how do you do it is, I mean, quite frankly, a lot of us are in the startup land. I mean, going into a new market ultimately is kind of like starting a new business to some degree. And so, again, obviously there's hopefully the go-to-market motion is known and your product's developed, and, that makes life a little bit easier. But I think as you go in with the planning of it, if you go in with the vigor of, really thinking about it as starting a new business, I found that sort of made things a little bit easier. Obviously clear sets of metrics in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, because it is an emotional play as well. Going in is not easy. It takes time. It is like starting another business. And so, both understanding what you're trying to accomplish with core metrics will, everything in life is gray. It's never, black and white and easy. So that'll help you hone in on what's working and not working. I found personally, like, little small things that you wouldn't think matter all of a sudden turn into just more complicated and having to read the tea leaves. And so I think by having the good success metrics, and that kind of keeps you focused. And look, if it's not going to work out for whatever reason, that's the other thing. People do tend to be emotional, and there's lots of like other goodness that comes out of being in markets that maybe isn't really the primary reason to be there. And so being really clear about, okay, if it doesn't work, like, what is sort of that exit strategy? Because I think a lot of people stay too long, when things aren't working out, and you can, burn a lot of time and resources.
Gotcha. So you would suggest like having like, okay, we're going to go to this market, we're going to try XYZ, here's the metrics, we're going to make a call after. What would you say a timeline would be? Is it like 18 months? Is it 2 years? Is it 6 months? Like, what have you
That's a
found?
good question.
Like,
I don't know. Everything's a little different, but it takes
depends,
time. I mean, it's like any business model, it's always a little, all of the things that you're expecting are going to be a little harder, and it's going to take a little bit longer. But I mean, I wouldn't think under a year. I mean, quite honestly, even I was planning to be in the UK for 6 months, and we're considering that, extending that, just because it just takes a while to get established. And then once you have that momentum, even if your plan is, in my case, to hand that off to somebody locally, it takes time. So yeah, I would say probably a year to 18 months is realistic.
Yeah, in our experience, Erica, it took us 2 to 3 years really in the countries that we were in before we had proof of strategy that that market was actually working for us. And in some cases we would be doing like direct, in some cases we'd be doing through channel or reseller partners. And so that could have a variance for us. But if you're going in and 6 months later it's not working for you, that's too early. Like to Brenton's point, you gotta first of all, don't go in unless you're willing to put 2 years of solid hard work into that market. But if you're 2 to 3 years in and it's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then you're probably time to find, it's an opportunity cost at that point, right? We'll talk a little bit more about the risk down the road, but it's like, 2 to 3 years, I think, is reasonable for any new market.
And Brenton, you mentioned the emotional component. Keith, when we had our prep call, I remember you had some good comments in terms of like maybe pushing back on founders that want to go explore the world. And you're like, well, you've got billions of dollars or trillions of dollars of market in your own backyard with kind of the US just south of us. So talk a little bit about how you would have that conversation when a founder might come with you very emotionally excited about a new opportunity.
Yeah, what usually happens for a startup is as an opportunity emerges, a company will reach out to them from France, or they'll get an exciting opportunity that emerges from a place far away. And I mean, I get it. I understand why you'd want to jump on that, because it's any revenue in the early stages of a business is super important. But you have to remember, like California is like, if California was a country, it'd be like the 5th or 6th or something like that. GDP in the world, speaks English, isn't on the same time zone as us. So like, why the hell would you go to France when you've got California directly below you? You know what I mean? So you just have to be really mindful of that. And there's so many, I mean, Karen can talk to the compliance and challenges that are in the employee side of things as you go to other countries as well. So I think, like $1 trillion of business is done in the New York metropolitan area. And so going international can be the right choice, but it has to be done thoughtfully and strategically and not just opportunistically. But I would never tell a startup, don't take that deal in France, because that deal in France might be the thing that gets you the next round of investment, that gets you you know what I mean? So you have to look at it through a lens of, is the cost, is the price worth the payoff? And sometimes it just isn't. And sometimes you have to really be careful about where you take your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no lack of shiny things out there, I'm sure. And then I like your point around like that key contract in one country that may be the piece you need right now to get you to the next level, but having 3 or 4 of those kind of in all different countries with all the requirements you might need to face is also will then not have a good outcome for the organization.
Yeah, I'm working
so-
with a, oh, sorry, go. I'm working with a company right now that has just took on a customer in France. And as an example, and I mean, it's a massive nightmare for them, like servicing that customer, being able to communicate effectively. They want their contracts, they want all their communication to be in French. And so it just brings this huge amount of extra labor involved. And all that work that the company is doing right now will down the road become useful, but it's a distraction from what they could be, doing in terms of business in North America right now. So that's just that trade-off that you have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karen, for you, I would imagine companies come to you saying, "Oh, I want to just hire like 1 or 2 people," or so on. How do you facilitate that conversation of really kind of poking at them a little bit in terms of, do they need people there, or do they, like, is that something that you have to deal with a bit as well?
Yeah, so a lot of the guidance that we provide with companies is that once you start to get to about 10 to 15 employees in a given country, that's when you want to start strategically thinking about setting up your own legal entity. But anything under 10 employees, where you've got 1 or 2 in various countries around the world, leveraging a service like Communitech Outpost as the employer of record certainly will allow you to focus on doing what you need to do and not about the administration and worrying about compliance and tax remittances and all of the other legal pieces that come with hiring talent in foreign countries. So that's what we're really trying to offer through the service, is eliminating that risk and exposure for companies, so that you focus on selling and getting in market, and we'll take care of the legal compliance side of things when it comes to hiring employees. So I would say that's how we typically guide companies. I mean, our goal is to eventually graduate them from the program so that they can successfully create their own entity and do it alone. But until they get to that, I would say, level of, justification in terms of the cost involved, we're happy to help them.
Yeah. Do you help people find talent as well in those countries, or is it more they found talent and then they come to you for the operational components?
So most of the time they've already sourced the talent themselves. If they do come asking for help in searching for the right talent, we have a number of partners that we could absolutely recommend them to have a conversation with and find out what talent they specifically need to address, and the agency partners can typically help with that.
Okay. And I'll just ask Keith and Brenton on that as well. Like, when you're looking for talent in other countries, do you use generally search firms? Is it word of mouth? Is it postings? Like, is there any kind of good strategy there that you can share?
Go ahead, Brenton.
We've done a little bit of everything. We've had a bit of an anchor in the UK, just in terms of, we've had some people here, so they bring their own network, but we have had recruiters. One of the other opportunities, just using an employee of record, though, from our, ultimately from Vancouver staff who may be now going back home, and we've used actually employer of record to be able to allow them to go back into countries where we wouldn't normally be. And that's actually been an opportunity where they now start their own network back in whatever home country they had been in. So there's almost like a sort of a reverse version of that has provided some opportunity as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I would recommend is find your PR firm before you find your recruiter. So what kind of a narrative and story are you creating in that local market? So we built a pretty significant team in Singapore at Galvanize, and one of the things we really did is tell the local story about why we mattered. And in a lot of cases, like in those markets, you're not known, or it's not understood like who you are compared to some of the bigger brands, perhaps. And so I think if you have a really good, guerrilla marketing and some narrative around what you're doing and how you're part of something bigger, that can let you sort of like one up or get access to talent that perhaps you wouldn't normally see because they just don't know who you are there.
Yeah. And I would, like, having a PR firm, that's probably like a galvanized size organization would have that luxury. I like your comment around the guerrilla marketing campaign, because I think our startups are
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If you don't have the financial wherewithal to hire a PR firm, just do PR. Like before you do recruiting, do some legwork, attend some local events that are in that environment, find some ways to sort of make your story about why you matter and why your company is important and what you're doing in the world, have that become present in that local market. That's one of the things that Galvanize, I think, just did really successfully here in Vancouver and
I
around
would even
the world,
suggest,
create that story.
Karen?
Sorry, Keith, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I would even suggest connecting with in-country hubs like BC Tech or like Communitech, because again, those hubs in various countries have great connections to, sources of talent and how to connect in with the local tech talent as well. I know a number of hubs, in the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Denmark, like they're all over. So, those are a really great asset, I think, to get in and leverage and even have a conversation with, the equivalent of myself or Erica at those hubs, and help get you kind of connected with the community.
You want to be you want to, as a smaller company, you want to be like one of those fish that like attaches to the whale. So, the whale's going along, like let them do all the heavy lifting, all the platform work, all that. And then you just sort of stay there and, they eat and then you get the scraps. It's like, just be one of those fish.
Yeah. And those hubs, they're normally in the university towns as well. So it kind of ties into our previous point of really where you're going to find that young, hungry talent that's looking for something interesting. Are you guys finding the fact that we are Canadian companies to be beneficial, or does that not really factor in attracting kind of global talent in their own countries?
Didn't really matter for us.
Anybody?
Yeah, we're in enough geos now. It's a Canadian company, it's a worldwide operation. So I don't think that has made a material difference.
Okay. Excellent. Perfect. So I think we've talked about why you'd want to go international. We've talked about where you would find talent and a few of those strategies. Now we have to talk about the risk side of the equation and the compliance and all the things that might go wrong or unforeseen costs and so on that you might see as you go into different countries. So I know, Karen, you've got like a great network of different countries that you service. Can you give us a bit of a sense of things that organizations may not realize as they go into like, oh, I want to hire somebody in France, or I want to hire somebody, like costs they may not foresee or employment rules that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, so I think the big one is when companies go outside of Canada to hire, they will just try and hire the individual on a contract. And oftentimes that can end with a misclassification of an employee when they should really be hired as full-time. And if they get misclassified, then that may trigger an audit by the government, which then could result in fines and fees for you as the end company that has incorrectly hired a particular person. So those compliance pieces around contractor versus full-time, each government has its own guidelines on how they classify that. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest warnings I would give is, if you're hiring somebody on a contract, make sure they fit the definition of a contractor specific to that country. The other big piece is, again, every country has its own nuances around labor and employment law. So when it comes to compliance, especially in the event of a termination, it can get really sticky really quickly in various countries. Some countries have pretty stringent laws when it comes to termination. So again, as the employer of record, we take on that burden for you and ensure that, in the event of a termination, we're following all of the proper procedures and process as it relates to that specific country. So we have access to, anytime a law is updated, we're obviously giving you guidance and advice based on up-to-date real-time employment laws to try and really reduce and minimize that risk for you. So I would say those are probably the biggest, on the talent side of things when it comes to hiring that I would be watching for.
Absolutely. Keith, from a kind of risk compliance point of view, what have you seen?
Well, I used to have a rule that was you don't go international till you're $100 million in revenue. I mean, like you got access to the US, Canadian and US markets, which are massive. Why would you like take on the headache of going international? I've lowered that now. I'm willing to say that's now like say 30 million in revenue. Because there's a couple of key things. I mean, businesses like Karen's, you know, that are out there to support going international. There's a lot of service providers that are sort of sitting in that place, which is really taking the friction out of being in international markets for staff. And the second thing is like AI right now. Like, you know, I'm amazed we made it like 35 minutes without dropping the word AI into the conversation. Like, we should get like
I've been holding my tongue because I'm
we
like,
should get a reward for that. But I mean, like, AI nowadays like can give you a lot of sort of the right answers to certain questions around like what do you need to do to set things up in certain locations, and then when you kind of hit the limit of what it can provide, then you reach out to those service providers. But now you're more educated about what you know what the consideration should be in a particular market, as an example. So I think, you know, those things are mitigating it. But it's like I go back to, it's like is the juice worth the squeeze? Opportunity costs. Like, why are you going international when you have access to markets that are really huge, that speak the same language that you speak? And you don't, you know, it's got to be a reason that pay, you know, it's going to pay off ultimately. And as you get bigger and you're into your scale up stage, it becomes more, I think, a legitimate strategy. But when you're a startup, other than accessing low cost talent, that skilled low cost talent, I think you have to be really mindful of why you're doing it.
Brenton?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about establishing enough of a presence in a market to go into it. So, you know, Keith, to your point, whatever the dollar value is, but and actually, if from a Canadian perspective, starting with the U.S. market, I mean, let's face it, the U.S. is just made up of, you know, a number of different markets. So quite honestly, whether you're going into California or going into New York or into Boston potentially, it's not radically different than going into the U.K. Like, it's all the same components that you need to get right. Some things are easier, time zone, language, all the rest of it, you know. But at the end of the day, you still have to establish that market presence and get enough of a sort of gravitational pull, both on your people and your customers and everything else that needs to go into that. So, you know, that's sort of where the business, but coming back to the business model, you've got to be pretty certain that you can do that. Otherwise, you are kind of just sort of opportunistically taking on a few customers or partners or whatever, wherever you are. And that may be fine in a very sort of low effort, no cost investment way, like starting with a partner to let them do it. And, you know, if they fail, it's sort of no harm, no foul. But once you go in, you do need to make sure that you can get that presence started.
Yeah, and just to build on what you just said there's already, if you just look at the US market today, you can't think of the US market as this one big sort of clump. There is actually very specific labor rules in different states. Like California has different rules to other places. I mean, Karen can really dig into this more than I can. But, you know, even in the US today, you have to think about, okay, if I'm going into these particular markets, what do I need to know? What do I need to be aware of? And what do I need to do to make sure that I'm actually meeting the laws and the rules of that locale?
Yeah, that's a good point, Keith, because every state is, I don't want to say like a different country, but every state has its own nuances and some are drastically different from each other. And just a great example is, you know, the state of California, if you end up terminating somebody, any monies owed to that individual have to be paid the day you terminate. And that's not something we're used to in Canada. We're used to giving a minimum of 2 weeks notice, and pay for any monies owed will come on the next payroll cycle. So those are just some, you know, minor details, but details that could easily get you into a really not so good situation if you terminate somebody and don't pay them by the end of business day that day. So just some things to be mindful of, and certainly that's where we step in to make sure that we're managing that for you. So yeah.
Has anybody got themselves in trouble with employees? Like during COVID, people kind of moved to different places and worked remotely and so on. And maybe they continue doing that for an extended period of time, but either wasn't set up in the right state in the US or country. Like, what's the consequences for that? Like being kind of working remotely, but not on paper and physical doesn't line up. Like, any advice there?
Yeah, so we've had some founders find out that the employees just moved away from Canada and didn't tell their HR business person and is working for them from the UK, but still on Canadian payroll. So again, those situations you obviously want to address and fix very quickly, because again, they're a Canadian working in the UK, likely a citizen. So, the visa and they don't have to worry about citizenship, but at the same time, they're not paying UK taxes as an employee and getting paid from a Canadian company. So we've had founders call frantically saying, what do I do in this scenario? So we'll work very closely with, and then we onboard them with our UK entity. So, I mean, they're all fixable, but certainly things that need to be addressed immediately before you go a year or two and recognize that, oh, we should have done that differently. And then you could be subject to potential fines.
And would that be a challenge? Would it create implications for the organization, but also for the individual?
It would definitely create implications for both, because again, as the employee, you're living in the UK, but working for a Canadian company, you need to be paying UK taxes. And vice versa, you as a Canadian employer are now essentially hiring and having a UK citizen work for you, but you're not paying any employer taxes specific to the UK government. So yeah, it's definitely implications for both.
Okay. And not that I think our startups would do this, but how would they know? They being the tax authorities, if you had people in places where physical and on paper doesn't align, like have people been caught by, I don't know, how would they get caught? And then it sounds like there'll be quite heavy consequences if they do.
So, I mean, for countries that offer benefits, oftentimes it'll get flagged if their employer is not paying for healthcare benefits for them that are sometimes mandatory in certain countries. So it can get flagged that way. Again, if they're hired as a contractor, they are responsible for submitting and remitting their own taxes. And again, it often can get flagged when they're submitting their own independent contractor taxes, that it then gets flagged to the government that, well, how is this person getting paid and who is paying them and why are there
you don't have the match? Yeah,
why are the direct deposits to their bank from a Canadian entity, and that Canadian entity is not paying government taxes? So it's catchable for sure. It may take a year or two for the government to catch it, but it's definitely something that is easily flagged and for audit.
Yeah, and they don't go after the individual, they go after the company because that's where they know where the fines can be lucrative for the government.
Life is complicated. It eventually catches up to you. So both on all parties, I think. Well,
yes.
and we actually we're very much promoting sort of a remote first work environment, and so we did have a number of employees that did want to take advantage of that and move back to home countries, and so. The sort of the unofficial handshake, I guess, ultimately was, we're going to, facilitate that, as best we can and use employer of record and other sort of ways to do it if it wasn't sort of in one of our hubs. But that, people had to be truthful about that and that, sort of the consequences of not being truthful, we spelled out quite clearly for all of staff.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to what are you strategically attempting to do as an organization? Do you have concentrations where you're trying to create a concentration of skill and focus, local knowledge, context, and understanding? I think in some cases the right thing to do is terminate the employee if they're moving to another location. I mean, there's a balance between creating an environment which is remote friendly and employees can go anywhere, and there's a focus towards creating what's strategically ideal for the success of your business, and thus everyone else in the company, every other employee succeeding because you as a group are succeeding because you've got this concentration of skill and focus. And so I think there's this, I was a CTO and then I went to become a chief people officer for a couple of years, and I really learned a lot about thinking about the people side of things in a very strategic manner to, almost play in an engineering mindset to what's the right thing for people for the collective good of the larger organization. And sometimes the right thing to do is cut people free if they want to go anywhere in the world. And if you're not set up for that, or it doesn't it doesn't necessarily add to your strategic like success as a business. Like you got to question yourself, why are you doing it? Like, especially if you're smaller, like you have to be really thoughtful. There's a really great book as well, I'll recommend, called Running Remote by Liam Wright, which talks about how to do remote work successfully. Because everybody talks about, you know, all the tech and everything about doing it, but it's like, how do you do it well? How do you do asynchronous versus synchronous meetings? How do you do, you know, like time-based communication in an effective manner? And I think though, you know, that's another side of it. It's like, okay, sure, you're remote, but are you using the technology effectively? And Running Remote, that book is really good in entryway into the nuts and bolts of how to do it properly.
And then Keith, I think as well, just from the investor side of things, when companies start to, you know, prepare for Series C or Series A round, obviously an investor is going to do their due diligence. So if they see that a company has, you know, contractors in various countries all around the world, I think that might be an indicator of a red flag to make sure, well, are they really contractors? Are they set up properly? Should they be full-time? Just the due diligence side of things when you're prepping for a funding round, again, that could have implications, I'm sure.
Totally, it does. I mean, every choice you make, you have to look at it, especially if you're in that sort of, you're raising money, you're going from, you know, pre-seed to seed to Series A, Series B, and onwards. Every round that's going to follow the one that you're currently in is going to look back in time and say, the choices you made, were they smart choices? Did they set you up for the next round? And so you have to think of the investors as looking for a reason not to invest in you. And every time you give them a reason not to, they'll take it and they won't invest.
Well, and speaking from the buy side, you know, we've looked at acquisitions where that has been the one of a few red flags, but definitely a major decision not to do an investment just because we couldn't, you know, the people's everything. And if you can't guarantee that or it's messy, it just, it becomes not worth the risk.
And on the flip side, though, like we set up a team in India, we had a legal entity, I was on the board, we had every structure was in place, we had scaled out, we had our own facility. That became actually one of the things that was a reason why the company Diligent that purchased Galvanize, it was one of the selling factors. So if you do it right and you create a concentration with effectiveness, that can actually be a reason why an acquirer would see you as attractive, because they see you as having that capability in a remote location where they want to, they themselves want to have a footprint.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes we're so focused on the build out, on the technical debt, you don't realize what people debt might actually do to your business or how it actually could be a benefit. So thank you for that. And Keith, you touched on kind of what my last question was going to be. So if anybody from the audience has questions, please drop your questions in the chat and we'll go to that in a second. Erica, if you just want to maybe scan the comments, because I saw there was a lot of comments in there, just scan if there's any questions I've missed so far. That would be great. I'll throw over to you. But yeah, the last question I had was just how do you build, like any tips or tricks on that infrastructure and communication channels and how you build that out, and how is it different if people are like in the same city but just working remote and hybrid versus actually in different geographies? Like you touched on it, sounds like a great book. Any other kind of, Brenton or Karen, any other comments from you on that, like the scaffolding that might be needed to make something like this more successful?
I mean, it's all relationship based at the end of the day. And that's the being on the ground element to it. And, you know, one of the challenges with remote work is, you know, we've certainly seen it where, well, you know, these people are only coming in on Mondays and Fridays. These people are Tuesday, you know, so actually pulling together, especially, you know, the sort of the broader, you need a group. That's been an issue for sure. Yeah, and I'm sort of with Keith too, like remote working is not successfully being asynchronous. So those are two very different things, and it takes a lot of effort. You know, certainly at Elastic Path, we have invested a lot of effort to try to make that work as best it can. And, you know, we certainly have our hiccups, and, you know, what's good for everybody yesterday is not where people are going tomorrow. So it's an ever moving target, quite frankly.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, we don't get, I would say, really involved in the remote work component and how employees are supported on once they become a remote worker. But in certainly conversations with a lot of the founders we work with, it is something that they do struggle with. in terms of not just how to manage a remote team, but how do you manage a culturally diverse team that's spread across a number of different countries. So, I think there's absolutely room for, organizations to provide our founders more support structures in place to help them figure out how do you manage a remote team that's dispersed across a variety of cultures and time zones. It is challenging.
Yeah, I guess one of the areas too, getting sort of to that minimum size or threshold is, to think also about all the other on the ground needs. So to your point, the infrastructure. So whether that's IT personnel or people and culture, you can kind of get away with, not a lot of that, to some degree, but then you hit a certain mass where you just need it, and it's being typically serviced by contractors and people helping out, where it's not you don't need a full-time position. So that sort of brings in its own challenges until you hit a scale that's big enough where you actually have full-time people doing those different roles. So, I think as you go into that new market, you do need to kind of consider all that other stuff, because it does sort of have different looks and feels as you start to grow up your scale.
Thank you. David, I see your question. Just before I get to you, Erica, any other questions in the comments I missed?
No, there was a few bit of activity through there. I think one of the notes was kind of touching on the idea of kind of product localization, and if anyone has any tips on kind of getting through any barriers of localizing to different markets. So I'm not sure, maybe that's for Brenton and Keith. Any thoughts on how to work through the localization of your product when you go global?
There's a lot of really great tools for localization nowadays. One thing that I would suggest, when we were ACL, before we became Galvanize, we made the decision to deliver our product in all languages and locales at the same time. So prior to that, we would deliver the product, and then we would have a localized version come out afterwards based on the translation work of that. And we made the decision to stop doing that. It was one of the best decisions we ever made as a company, that everybody in the world gets the software at the same time. So that means that we would have to wait for the localization. And you'd say, well, why would you do that if you have the English version ready to go? The reason why is because you make sure that you treat all of your localized versions with the same level of strategic value. Because as you go down the road later on, you're going to be big in some places and smaller in other places. But if you deliver at the same time with the same level of focus and getting all your localizations done, then you just become good at it. You become better at it. You become better at delivering to a global market. And so that's one of the things, the minute you have the second language, make sure that you deliver it at the same time as you deliver English.
We're one step before, so we're still delivering in English, but having done this with Intel in many moons ago, I definitely agree with that strategy. Once you're into one extra, you might as well do them all. It's, it's not dissimilar, and then you just get good at that.
Excellent. Okay, David, great question. So how do you manage data and information privacy with teams from different parts of the world? And I think this could be, if you've just got that client in a different region, but also if you have different people, you may not have data residency because they're working from different places. How do you manage that? I'm sure it's no small feat.
Yeah, so we had employees in about, I don't know, maybe over a dozen countries. What we did is we were really careful in terms of the tooling that we selected. So this is one of the things that you can do as a startup, or a smaller company, you can look at does the tooling itself support, say, employee data being in Europe, kept in Europe, so that you're not moving data across into locales that maybe it goes against compliance, like GDPR as an example. So look first to your tooling. Don't overthink it as well on the employee side. It's not that big of a deal as long as you're treating your employee data with respect and you're being careful. But I think tooling's a key way to do it, to make sure they're. And then for us as a business, we wouldn't go into a new market with our product until Amazon, we were on top of Amazon, whether you're on Amazon or Google or Azure. It's we would never set up a separate system. We would wait until like I said earlier, that big fish, the big whale were the little fish. When Amazon was capable in Japan, guess what? Then we put our system in Japan. And so I think it's like let the big kids do the hard work and set all that stuff up, and then you just sort of build on top of that.
We did the exact same thing. Tooling for taking care of the technical side, and product is sitting on what Amazon and Google are doing. And yeah, we're literally identical.
And if you're building something custom for a new location, ask yourself, like, why are you doing that? That's a red flag, like, you know, at least a yellow flag. It's like why are we doing something specific and unique and custom for this particular location? Like that for me is that's something to make you step back and look at your strategy overall.
Mhm.
And I think from an employer of record side of things, it's not directly related, I would say, to privacy and sharing of information. You're going to just all of a sudden, you know, send an employee, not transfer that directly to the employee. Like any form of financial payment to that employee would have to come through your employer of record. So I think these are just things to be mindful of. And then, you know, in the event of a termination, do not have a conversation with the employee that you are terminating until you've spoken with, you know, whichever employer of record you're using, whether it's us, Deal, Remote, whoever it is. Don't have a conversation with the employee until you've spoken with your EOR. So those are probably just some guidelines around just information sharing, and certainly some more, I would say, financial privacy than anything.
Excellent. No, that's great advice from all parties. I see, Mitch, you've got a comment around building some tools. Relationships with some tools. I think that sounds like that offers some challenges. So thank you for your comment there. I know I don't see any other questions. So Erica, I don't think I missed any.
Erica, can I give?
Do you want to comment?
Can I give a multi-million-dollar tip?
Yes.
So this is going to help you make a lot of money if you can pull it off successfully. So there are organizations in the world today who are multinationals. So it's the parent organization, and they have a ton of organizations underneath them that are in all different countries. So you can kind of think of them as like sister orgs, where they're all owned by one, but they're sister orgs, right? If you can get into one of them and you can be a smashing success in that organization, then they want to show off to the parent organization that they're succeeding with your technology. Then guess what happens? They want to start taking you across to all the sister organizations. So in one large company, your company can get spread across all these sister companies to become international. And that can be a really key way to all of a sudden become an international business. Because what you're doing is you're servicing one company. But in that, they're helping you because they want you to be a success. You want them to be a success. They're helping you become this international business and going across their different locales where they have their own business. So that could be a really good way to do it, where you're not spread out. Now, there's concentration risk to that revenue, so you got to be careful. You might want to get one or two multinationals as customers, but just a really good way. We use that technique, and it really helped us as a business.